What's up everybody, welcome to my first Unreal Engine 5 tutorial. So in this series we're going to make a full game and we're actually going to make a multiplayer game. It's going to be a pretty simple shooter game and it's not really that much about the gameplay itself. It's more about setting up the framework for multiplayer and how all those things work. So we're going to take a look at the different classes that we can use, like a GameMode, a GameInstance, a PlayerState, a GameState, PlayerControllers. What do they do in multiplayer, what should the server do, what should clients do, and how do we make sure they all do that. So that's more or less what this series is about, and we're pretty much going to make an entire game. So we're going to start at an empty project and we're going to set up everything ourselves, also set up a menu so we can host a server, join a server, and all those kinds of things. So it should be a fun series and I hope you guys gonna enjoy it as well. So first of all, obviously we need a character, so in the first part we're quickly gonna set up one. Let's just start by doing that. So let's start by creating our project. So let's go to the Games tab. I'm going to create a blank project. It's blueprint, desktop maximum, so default settings should be fine, and I'm just gonna name it YouTube GameDev Raw Shooter, and I'm gonna hit create. I'll see you guys when it's done. So here we are inside our new project and we have this default map. It's very small, so let's start by creating a map where we can actually walk around and do a little something. So I'm going to open the content drawer in the bottom left over here, and I'm going to create a new folder first and call that maps. And then I'm going to go to the file and create a new level, and I'm going to create a basic level. That should be fine for now, and hit create. So here we are in our new level. Something new in Unreal Engine is the environmental light mixer. So that's a pretty cool tab. It's not really that special, but it's just very handy. You have all of the properties for the lighting in the same place and you can edit everything in here. So that's a pretty cool feature for Unreal Engine 5 as well. So first thing we need to do is save this level. So save current level as, and we're going to save it in the maps folder, and I'm just going to call this map 1. So at least we have a level now, but we need some assets to use in here as well. So I'm going to use assets from the Lyra starter game. It's a shooter game for Unreal Engine 5. You can get it on the marketplace. It's a free example project from Epic. So if you go to the marketplace, Unreal Engine 5, and you go to the game samples over here, there you have the Lyra starter game. So it's a pretty cool example project, but it's a bit more advanced. So if you are new to Unreal Engine 5, it's probably pretty hard to wrap your head around it. So this is why I'm making a pretty simple tutorial just for the basics. And if you are more advanced, you can look at projects like this on how to do things. So we're going to use assets from this project. So if you download it and you open it up, then you can follow along with the tutorial if you would like. So I have the Lyra starter project open here, and we're going to go to the content drawer and we're going to use the meshes from here. So let's go to the characters folder and then to the heroes, mannequin, and meshes. And I'm going to use the Quinn mesh, and it's also going to migrate the many mesh probably. So we have two meshes to play around with. So I'm just going to right click on Quinn and go to asset actions and migrate it. Now it's going to bring up a huge list of things that you might want to migrate. So a lot of things are bind together in this project. So migrating things from this could be a real pain. So that's why I'm showing this. So for the controls, you can just disable the control rig entirely. Then you do want to use the materials folder, that's fine. You want the meshes, you want the rig. No, you don't want the rig. And then you do want the textures. You don't want the materials, so not the physics materials. You do want the effects for the material functions, and you do want this square texture, and you can leave out this physical material if you'd like. So in a nutshell, you should get the characters and the effects folder, and you can disable the other ones. And we're going to migrate this, so select your proper project. So that's my YouTube GTR Shooter content folder, and that should be good to go. And now we're also going to migrate the animations. So I'm going to go to the animations folder, and I'm going to select the actions folder, the aim offsets, and the locomotion. And then I'm going to migrate those as well. So again, it's going to bring up a huge list of stuff that we might want to migrate. So let's see, we do not want to migrate the animation locomotion library. We do not need the audio. We do not need the control rig. So for the games folder, audio, we can disable all of this. So characters, abilities, we do not want that. Then we have the mannequin animations. So the blueprint, we could leave that in. Then we have the actions, we do want that folder. We do want the aim offsets. So we do not need the enumerations over here. The animation modifiers, we could probably just leave them out as well. Animation notify, we're going to leave that out also. Animation struct, leave it out. Linked layers, we can leave them out. So locomotion, we're going to keep that. Poses, also leave them out. Then we can also drop this, the curve compression settings. And for the material functions, we should already have these. So I think we can pretty much drop them. Well, let's just leave these in. It'll mention it if they're already there. So material instances, so let's just leave all of this in. We already have the meshes. We do not need the rig. Not need the textures. We do not need all of this stuff. And we do not need the physics material. So we could probably disable this as well. Those are from the meshes. So you only want the locomotion, aim offsets, actions, and you could leave in the animation blueprint, but it doesn't really matter. And we're going to migrate this again to your new project, and that should be good to go. So let's close the Lyra starter game, and let's see if we have all of this stuff in place. So let's check out the meshes first. Go to the mannequin, and we have two meshes in here, Manny and Quinn, so that seems to be working. And let's go to the animation tab, so we can actually play the animations that we imported. So all of that is working, so that's nice. So we could probably do a little bit of cleaning up over here. Let's double check. Oh, that looks fine, that looks fine. Okay, so I think we did a pretty good job at not migrating too much crap in here, so we should be good to go. So let's start by setting up our character with all of these assets. Inputs, so we can actually move around and look around with our character later. So if we go to edit and then go to project settings, we can define inputs. So go to input on the left over here. And over here we can add action mappings and axis mappings. So first we're going to add axis mappings for moving and looking around. So click the little plus sign, and the first one is going to be move forward. And I'm going to add a key over here, and that's the D key on my keyboard. So that's for moving forward, and then the scale is going to be 1. So that's good. Then I'm going to click the little plus sign next to the move forward, and I'm going to add another key in here, and that's the S key for moving backwards. So I'm going to set the scale to -1, and that will make me move backwards. Then I'm going to add a new axis mapping, and this is going to be move right. And that's going to be the D key on my keyboard. And for move right, you want the scale to be 1, so that's fine. Then we're going to add a second one for moving left, so that's the A key on my keyboard. And over here we need to make sure that we put the scale to -1. And then we are left with an axis mapping for turning. So add another one, call this turn, and I'm gonna bind this to the mouse x-axis. And the last one is going to be for looking up and down. So we're gonna call this look up, and this is going to be the mouse y-axis. And for the look up one, we need to make sure that we set this to -1, so it will match up with the movement of our mouse. So we have this out of the way, we can close it down, it will save automatically. And now we can go to the content browser and we're going to create our character. So let's go to the characters folder, and I'm going to right click and create a new blueprint class. And in the list over here, I'm going to select a character. So call this something like blueprint hero Quinn. I'm going to use the female, so I'm going to call her Quinn. Let's open it up. And if we go to the viewport, we can set the mesh and all of that fun stuff. So let's do that first. I'm going to select the mesh over here and assign my Quinn mesh. And let's make sure it's lined up. So we need to rotate it 90 degrees and drop it down about 90 units or so. So that's a bit much, maybe 88 units, that should be fine. So we have the mesh in place and we do not have anything to animate yet, so we'll come back to that later. Let me see. Let's create the input events first. So let's go to the event graph and let's set up the way we move. So let me switch my nodes quickly. So we have the input events created for move forward and all of those things. So we can look for those events in here. If we type move forward, we get the axis event move forward. So select that one. And from here, we're gonna add movement input. So look for add movement input. And from this node, we can simply get the actor's forward vector. So if we right click and get the forward vector, no, we want to get the actor's forward vector. And we can plug this into the direction. And then we can plug the axis value into the scale value, and that will make us move forward. Simple as that. So we can do the same thing for the move right. So we can look for that event, move right. And this time we also gonna add movement input, but we're gonna get the actor's right vector. Get actor right vector. And simply plug that in here. And that should be good to go as well. So for turning, we can add controller yaw input. So if we look for add controller yaw input, then we can hook this up to our input event. So look for event turn. And simply plug it in like this. And we can do the same thing for looking up and down, but then we're going to add controller pitch input. And we're going to bind this to our input look up event. And that should actually work already. So it's as simple as that. Now we need a camera, and we're going to use third-person animations because we don't have a first-person mesh for this character, and the tools that I prefer to use are not yet updated. So for now, it's not really about the gameplay anyway, it's more about the multiplayer framework, so we're just going to use a third-person mesh. So I'm going to select my capsule, and I'm going to add a spring arm component. And to the spring arm, I'm going to add a camera. And now we can set this up a little bit. So the arm length, I think, should be fine. And let me see. I'm just going to move it to the right a little bit and move it up. and then I'm going to select the camera itself and I'm going to rotate it down a little bit, something like this. So if I hit play, maybe something happens. No, not really, doesn't really matter. We're going to get back to that later. So we have the basics of our character set up. Let's see how we can actually play some animations. It's pretty much a graph where we can plug in all animations and it will determine what animation it should play depending on our velocity or our direction and things like that. So if we go to the animation tab and we're gonna create a BlendSpace over here, we need to select the skeleton that we want to create it for, and then we're gonna give it a name, so something like BlendSpace movement Quinn, and let's open it up. Now the first thing we want to do is set up the axis for this graph. So we have the horizontal axis and we're going to make this our direction. And it's going to go from minus 180 to 180. Oh, come on. So like this. And then for the vertical axis, this is going to be our speed. And we want to set this from 0 to 600 for the default character move speed. So that matches up. And now in this graph we can drop in the animations that we want to use for a certain direction combined with a certain speed. So the lower line is going to be all idle because the speed is all 0. So let's do that first. I'm going to look for unarmed animations. Unarmed idle. So we have the MM and the MF. I assume that's for male and female. I'm not quite sure, but I'm just gonna assume. So I'm gonna use the MF ones and I'm gonna grab the idle ready ones. So the first one I'm gonna drop right in the center at the bottom over here, and then I'm also gonna drop one at the bottom right and at the bottom left. So all three of those are idle animations. Then we're going to set up a walking, so look for unarmed walk. And we have walking backwards, forwards, left and right. So first one is going to be walk forward, and I'm going to drop that right at the first intersection here in the middle. So that's a speed of 150. And then for the walk backwards, it's going to be all the way to the right. And also all the way to the left, because both of those are 180 degrees. Only one is to the left and the other one is to the right. And then I'm also going to grab the walk left, and that's going to be right in between here. So in between forwards and backwards. And then we have walk right, and we're going to plug that in on the other side. And now we need to add our jog animations. So look for unarmed jog, and we're going to do the same thing at the top row over here. So let's drag in jog backwards and plug it in all the way to the right and also all the way to the left. And as you do, you can see the red lines disappear. So there were some bad quote unquote connections, but now we're adding new animations, so that should clean up. So let's add jog forward to the top center over here, and then we have jog left and right to plug right in between those. And that's pretty much all we need to do to set up our BlendSpace, so we can use this in the animation graph later. So if you hold Control, you can drag around the preview pin and you can see how things look and how they blend. So there's one thing I am going to change, and that's I'm going to set the smoothing time over here to 0.1 second. And I'm also going to do that for the other axis. And if I scroll down over here, there we have the wait speed, and I'm also going to adjust that. I'm going to set it to something about 3. You can play around with this a little bit. It's how fast the animations blend if you switch really fast from one side to another. So it's to prevent some hiccups and things like that. So those are not values that are set in stone. You can play around with them. So we have a BlendSpace set up. Let's continue by creating an animation blueprint. So back in the content drawer, we can right click and go to the animation section and create an animation blueprint. So again, we need to select the skeleton we want to create it for and hit create. This is going to be my anim blueprint for the hero Quinn. And let's open it up. So we have an animation graph where we make up the pose of the animation and where we plug in the actual animations and things like that. And there we have an event graph as well, where we can get data to drive the animation graph, pretty much. So let's start in our animation graph, and we created the BlendSpace. So if you go to the asset browser over here, all of the animations and BlendSpaces, AimOffsets and things like that you can use for this skeleton, you can find in here. So we're going to drag in the BlendSpace that we created, and we can simply plug this into our output pose. And now all we need is two variables to drive this blend speed. So let's create them. Right click over here and promote to variable. And that's going to be my direction. So that's fine. And the other one is going to be speed. So also promote that to a variable. And now we can go to the event graph and make sure something is actually stored in the variables. So I'm going to move the try get pawn owner up a little bit, and I'm going to look for event begin play. From the event begin play, we can cast to the character that we created. So let's cast to our hero Quinn character. And we're going to promote this to a variable as well. And that's going to be my character. So we have that stored and we can access that whenever we want. So now I'm going to drag it in over here in the blueprint update animation, and first I'm going to check if it's valid or not, to make sure we actually have a character possessed and assigned. And then I'm going to get the velocity from this character. Get velocity. So this one. And from this velocity we can get the vector length. So that's our speed. Get vector. Oh, come on. There we go. So search for vector length. And we can store this variable in our speed. So that should work. And then from this get velocity, we can also get our direction. So if I right click in an empty place over here and look for calculate direction and use this node. So you see we need to plug in the velocity over here, so we can simply use this node and plug it in. And then I'm going to drag off the character again, and I'm going to look for my base aim rotation. And this base aim rotation, I'm going to right click it and split the struct pin. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. And then the only thing I'm going to connect is the yaw and plug this in over here. And then we can store this in our direction. And now both of our variables should work, and the blend space should actually work as well. So we can compile and save this. And now let's see how we tie everything together so we actually spawn in with our character. Because right now if I hit play, we still have the default pawn and we can fly around. So we need to fix a few things. So the first thing we need to do is make sure that our character actually uses the animation blueprint that we created. So let's go to our character and select the mesh from our character. And then on the right side we can define the animation class, and that's our animation blueprint. So we can plug it in over here, and you can see immediately he's starting to play animations, or see actually. So that's done, and now we need to make sure that we actually spawn with our character. So we're going to start by creating the first little piece of our framework. So let's go to the content folder, and I'm going to create a new folder in here and call this framework. And we need to create a game mode. So I'm going to right click, go to blueprint class, and over here I can simply select the game mode base from the list. And let's call this blueprint shooter game mode. No. So a game mode basically defines the rules of the game, kinda. So you set up the default classes for a character, PlayerController, things like that. and it's also something that only exists on the server. Well, it's not replicated to the clients, let's put it like that. So only the server really uses the game mode in a multiplayer game, and only relevant to the server. But that's not really important right now. So the first thing we're going to do in the game mode is go to the right side over here and set up the class for our player. So the default pawn class, and we're going to change that to our blueprint hero Quinn. So the HUD class, we can remove that. We're not going to use it, so I'm just going to clear that. And for the rest, we can keep it as it is for now. So compile and save it. And now we need to make sure that the game actually uses our game mode. So let's go to edit and then to the project settings again. And over here we have a tab called maps and modes. And over here we can change the game mode at the top. So I'm going to select my shooter game mode. And then I'm also going to set the default map to my newly created level. So by default it will load my own level instead of the example level. So we have the game mode set up, and this should work. So I think right now if we hit play, we actually spawn with our own character, and we can walk around. So let's see what happens. And here we have it. So I can move backwards and to the sides, but I cannot move forward. So I probably missed a connection somewhere. So let's take a look at my character. Get active forward vector, and I did plug in the forward vector still. So let's take a look at the project settings, at the inputs, move forward. Oh, I should have set this at W, obviously. So I had both of these set at the D key. So right now W, S move forward backwards, D and A move left and right. So this should work better. And now I can move in all 4 directions, and we have proper animations playing for the proper direction. So you can see some shadows appearing at foot at some points. So those are from particle systems that we didn't migrate into the project, and we still have notifies and things like that in the animations. So we're going to get rid of that later, don't worry about it. For now this should work. So we have a character we can walk around with, and we're spawning with our own character and our own game mode. So let's make this a little bit more interesting, and let's give her a gun. So I want to be able to right click with my character, and then she's gonna pull out a gun and aim a weapon. So first we're gonna add an input setting for this. So let's go to the project settings again, to the inputs, and this time we're gonna add an action mapping. So click the plus sign. And I'm gonna call this ADS. It's not really aiming down sight because it's third person, but doesn't really matter. And I'm gonna bind this to the right mouse button. So with this set up, first I'm gonna open my character blueprint, and I'm gonna make sure this event actually does something. So let's get rid of this, we don't need it right now. First I'm gonna add a variable for this and call this isAds. And then I'm going to add the event ADS that we created through the inputs. And when I press the right mouse button, I want to set ADS to true. And if I release it, I'm going to simply set it back to false. And that's all I'm going to do for now. So how are we going to make sure this is actually doing something? First, we're going to go to our animation blueprint. And let's hop into the event graph and create the same variable in here. So let's click the little plus sign, call this isAds as well. And that's also a boolean, so that's fine. Now we can drag off the player and get the isAds variable from the player side and store this over here. So we know if the player pressed the button or not. And from here, we're going to make a few changes to the animation graph. So let's dive into the event graph and disconnect this for now. So we have our base movement over here, and I'm going to store this in a pose so I can save my cached pose. and I can give this a name. So I'm going to call this locomotion, and we can use this later. So it's just to keep the graph a bit more clean, and we don't have to plug in the same blend spaces at all of the different locations. So save your cast pose. And then the animation we're using come with all kinds of aim offsets and things like that. So if we go to the animation folder and we have the aim offsets folder, there we have aim offset for the pistol with ADS. So let me see, the female pistol idle ADS aim offset. So we're going to use this one. So you can see she can move around, move her arms up and down, and we're going to make sure that that will follow the movement of our mouse. So we need the aim offset, so that's AO, and then they pop up over here, so I can drag them in the animation graph. So female idle ADS. And for the aim offset, we need a yaw and a pitch, but since the character we're using is always facing forward, we don't really need a yaw. So I'm just going to leave that to 0 and not going to create a variable for that. I'm only going to create the pitch one. So right click, promote a variable. For the animation or the base pose that we want to plug in here, that's the pistol idle animation pose. So just look for pistol idle ADS. So that's the same animation that the BlendSpace is made upon. So pistol idle ADS over here, and we can drag it in, connect it to the base pose. So if you open the BlendSpace and you look over here at the additive settings, the preview base pose, that's the same animation that we are using over here to plug in the base pose. So that's where you can get that. Now we need to make sure that the legs move and our upper body is aiming through the aim offset. So we're going to use a layered blend per bone to achieve that. So look for the layered blend per bone node. The blend pose is going to be the aim offset, and the base pose is going to be the locomotion. So we can look for that by use cast pose, and we can simply select that node and plug it in here. So this means that the blend space will return in here. And now we need to get a blend by bool. And for the true pin, this is going to be our ADS, and for the false pin, this is going to be our normal locomotion. So we can use the cast pose again, copy and paste the node and plug this into the false pin. And we can promote the boolean to a variable, and we're going to call that our isAds variable. So we don't need to create it, never mind, we already did. So we can drag it in, isAds, and plug it in here. And get rid of the variable that we created but we're not using. And now we can plug this into our output pose. And that should work. So all we need to do now is set up the layered blend per bone node. So if we select this, we can add branch filters. So in the layer setup, expand this and click the little plus sign over here and click it 3 times. And if we expand this even further, we can define the bone names where we want to blend our animations. So for the first one, if you look at your skeleton, I'm going to blend this at the spine 01 bone. So let's go back to the animation blueprint and simply enter the name of the bone here, spine 01. And then for the blend depth, I'm going to blend it something about 4 bones further up to the chain. So add 4 in here. And then for the other bones, you want to select the beginning of your legs. So that's the thigh bones probably. So thigh left and thigh right. And we need to fill in those in here. So thigh left. And for the blend depth, you're going to put this at -1. So you don't want to blend the animation into the legs. So that's why you put -1 over here. And do the same for the right side. So now the upper body will play the animation that's in the blend pose pin, and the lower body will play the animation that's in the base pose pin. And the isADS is driven by our character through the event graph. So right now, if we walk around and we right click, we should see an ADS animation playing. So let's see if that's working. And it actually is working. So she is not always pointing her gun forward, so I need to look into that. But the basics are working. Now we need to make sure that we also add a weapon mesh, so let's do that next. So before we dive into the weapon, let's take a look at a few small fixes here. So if we open the animation blueprint, we want to make sure that on the layered blend per bone, we select the mesh space rotation blend flag over here. So select layered blend per bone and enable this flag. And that should fix the rotation of the character. And now if we look how this works in multiplayer, we are going to see that this won't work for 2 players. So if we put the number of players at 2 and play as a listen server and hit the play button, so we can see both characters, but if one character is ADS and the other one doesn't see the animation change, so we need to fix that. So let's do that first. Go into our character over here. So a character exists on the server and locally. It exists for all players in the game, obviously, but this is an input event, and input only exists local. So we need to make sure that the server knows that we are ADSing, and the server will then tell all the other clients that are connected that this variable changed, and then everything should work. So because this is an input event and input events are always local, we need to make sure that the server knows about this. So if I'm server side, this shouldn't be really an issue. Only thing I need to do is select the variable and I set it to be replicated. So right now, if I compile, save and check it out again, then you will see that for the server side it actually works, but I need to make sure that the second viewport stays up. So over here, I'm the server, I ADS, and you can see the client also sees my animation changing. But if I select the client, still nothing happening on the server side because a client is not allowed to change variables. So we need to fix that, and we're going to use a replicated event for that. So let's disconnect this. And the first thing we need to do is check if we are the server, and we're going to use the has authority node. So if we are authority, that means we are the server, and if we are remote, that means we are a client. So the server can just change it himself and it will automatically replicate because he is allowed to do that. And for the client, we need to create a custom event. And let's call this something like a server set ADS. And with the event selected, we can set it to replicate on the right side over here, and we need to make sure that it runs on server. So this will run on the server if this is called by an owning client, and because I am the local client, I own this spawn, and therefore I can call this event and the server will respond to it. So right now, all we need to do in here is drag in our set isADS setter and simply plug it in. And I'm going to make sure that this is an input so we can use it both ways for setting it on and off. And now all we need to do in here for the client is call the server set isADS event and make sure that you set it to true. And now this should already work fine, but the only thing we are going to do to prevent the feeling of input lag is also plug this in back here. So for the client, it will also change the variable locally immediately. So this will make everything feel a little bit smoother. And now we can do the same thing for un-ADSing or not ADSing or however you want to call it. So we need to make sure that we set it back to false and then we should be good to go. So we can compile and save. And right now, if we check it out, it should work both ways. So now the client can ADS and the server sees it, and the other way around, it was already working and it's still working. So we have the replication for ADS fixed, and that's the first tiny introduction into multiplayer. So the last thing we're going to do in this video, and then we're going to wrap it up, we're going to add some models, effects and sounds for the weapon. So first of all, I'm going to use the guns from the Lyra starter game. So let's get into that project and migrate those. So if you go to the weapons folder, first let's do the pistol. So I'm simply going to go to the mesh folder, right click the mesh itself, and then asset actions migrate. So that way I will only get the mesh and the textures, and I do not get all of the animations and stuff that's involved. So I'm simply going to do that for all three of the weapons. So that was the pistol, and then I'm also going to do the rifle and the shotgun in here. Migrate, okay. And that's fine as well. So we don't need to override them because they belong to the pistol as well. And then for the shotgun, do the same thing. Migrate the skeletal mesh. And that should be good to go. So for FX and sounds, I'm going to use the military weapon packs that I've been using in the past as well. So if you can get your hands on some Niagara effects, that's probably the best. But right now I don't really have a lot to choose from, so I'm just going to use this. So at least I have some effects and sounds playing, and that's better than nothing. So it's just the way it is. So where is my project at? Oh, come on. So I'm going to get back to you when I edit these. So I use the military weapons silver pack for sounds, and I'm going to use the sci-fi weapons for effects. So this one. So I'm going to add those to my project, and then I'll return to you. So back in our game project, we have the Lyra weapon meshes in place. We have some effects and sounds to play around with. So let's quickly set up a very minimal fire event. So we have the feeling we achieved something, and then we're gonna wrap it up for this video. So let's go to our character, and first in the viewport, let's add our weapon mesh. So select your character mesh and click the little add button. We're gonna add another skeletal mesh to it, and that's gonna be our weapon mesh. So with this selected, we can select our pistol from the Lyra game. So I'm going to look for the pistol. And I'm going to use the Lyra one. So that's this one. And then we can connect it to a socket over here. So the parent socket. And I'm going to select the weapon R bone. So that's in the skeleton by default. And then all we need to do is make sure that it's properly rotated, and from experience I can tell this should be at -90 on the Z-axis, so like this. So if we play the animation later, this should work. So this is the unarmed animation set, and it's not really meant to carry a weapon. We're going to get back to that later in the project. For now, if we ADS, the weapon will point in the right direction. So make sure you set it up like this. Then let's go to the event graph, and we're going to add a fire weapon event. So first we need an input setting again. So go to the project settings, and let's add an input. And this is going to be our fire weapon input. And I'm going to bind that to the left mouse button. And now go back to your character, and we can look for the fire weapon input event. And right now all we are going to do in here is play some effects and fire off a line trace. So we're not going to actually fire something, but that doesn't really matter. So first of all, let's spawn an emitter attached, and that's going to be our muzzle flash. So we want to attach it to the socket that belongs to our weapon's muzzle. So if I double click on the little icon over here, it's going to open up the model. And on the left side, we actually have a socket called muzzle for the muzzle. So we can simply use that. So make sure that you copy the name. And we're going to attach the emitter to that socket, And then we need to drag in the weapon mesh component and plug that in over here. So the emitter that I want to spawn is going to be my pistol muzzle flash. And that's from the sci-fi weapons pack. Sorry, the military weapons pack. So pistol muzzle flash, this one. And I need to make sure that I snap it to the target and keep the world scale. So that's good to go. Now I want to play a sound over here. So I'm going to play sound 2D. This is not replicated, so only the local player can hear this. And it's a fire sound, so I'm firing the weapon, so it can be 2D in my case. We could get back to this later and change it. For now, we're going to keep things very simple. So let's assign a fire sound over here. So that's not the fire I meant. That's a different kind of fire. Let's go to the content browser. That's probably faster. So we have the sci-fi weapons, sounds, pistol. And over here, I'm going to use the pistol fire cue and plug it in over here. And then the last thing I want to do for now is set up a line trace by channel. And I'm not really going to aim yet. I'm simply going to fire off the muzzle socket from the weapon. So I'm going to drag in the weapon component again and get the socket transform. So we want to get the socket transform from the muzzle socket, where we also played the muzzle flash animation. So I'm going to right click this pin and I'm going to split the struct pin. The return value location is going to be the start of my tracing point. From the rotation I can get the forward vector of the weapon. And then I can simply multiply this vector by something like 100,000. So it will give this vector multiplier, but we can right click the pin over here and convert the pin to an integer. And now we can multiply this to something like 100,000, something like that. Drag off the return value location and add both vectors together. And that's going to be the endpoint of our line trace. And now we can set this to draw debug for duration, so we can see the line trace as well. And now we should be able to somewhat fire our weapon. So let's see what happens if we go in game. So that's kind of working. I can move, I can look around, and I can fire my weapon. The only thing is I cannot look up and down, so we can probably fix that pretty easily. If we go into our character blueprint over here, and I think if we select the spring arm component, then we need to enable the use pawn control rotation. And I think that should already fix the issue, so let's double check. So right now we can look up and down, and that's actually working. The only thing that's not working is our aim offset, because we are not actually plugging in a value into that. So let's see if we can fix that quickly as well. Aim offset called pitch, but we didn't do anything with it, so that's why our character is not aiming up and down. So if we go to the event graph, we already have a node over here called get base aim rotation, and that also returns the aim pitch of our character, so we can use that. There's one minor issue with that, and I'm going to show you. So we can plug this in over here, and if we would connect this up, then it would kind of work, but not really. So I'm going to add a little print in here to show you why. So compile, make sure that I plug this in as well. So right now, if we are playing and we are in multiplayer, so I can aim up and down, but if the other client is looking at it, you can see it's bugging out at some point when I start to aim lower than horizontally, then the client's character will aim straight up in the sky. And as you see the values on the left side, it kind of makes sense, because right now my rotation is 90 and it will go down to 0 over here when I'm aiming straight forward. And after that, it will switch over to 360 on the client side. So instead of having 360 over here, we need to make sure that it says -1 and then goes all the way up to -90. So if we go back to our animation blueprint, then we can simply disconnect the pitch over here and get rid of the print. And we want to know if the pitch value is greater than 90. So we cannot go exceed our 90 because we cannot aim further up than straight up in the sky. So every time that we are higher than 90, we are simply going to subtract 360 of it. So that should fix our offset problem. So if we plug this into a branch, so if it's greater than 90, we want to get the pitch from here and subtract 360 and store that in our aim pitch. And if the pitch is smaller than 90, we can simply store it in the pitch value and that should be good to go. So we can plug it in here directly and make sure that you connect both of them up to the execution again. And now the aim offset should work in multiplayer as well without any weird hiccups. So right now I can aim up and down and this will still look smooth on both the server and the client side, and the other way around it's also still working. So we have the aim offset issue fixed as well. So I think for now we're gonna call it. We have a character, we can walk around, we can shoot, we have a muzzle flash playing, we have a little sound playing, we're actually tracing something, and most of this is working in multiplayer as well. So these are really the basics. We're gonna dive into things deeper, but we actually need a character to be able to do something, so we need to start somewhere. So thanks for watching everybody. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please leave a like. You can also join the GameDev Raw Discord and talk about videos, or if you have problems with videos, or if you just want to show off some of your projects, jump in there, it's fun. So thanks for watching everybody, laters.